So, continuing our discussion on motherhood, let's talk a little bit about Dworkin and Walk's article, Getting Your Body Back, in which they're discussing the way in which the media portrays motherhood and really puts restrictions on motherhood. So, first and foremost, really, there's this paradox of pregnancy in which pregnant bodies are the paradigm of the successful womanly body. So, we really can't think of a more feminine female womanly body than one that is pregnant. This is the paradigm of femaleness, right? Nothing exhibits that you are more female than emphasizing pregnantness because you are emphasizing the existence of having an XX chromosome, the existence of a uterus and a functioning uterus, functional fallopian tubes, functioning ovaries, all of those things. At the same time that a pregnant body is maternally successful, it is aesthetically problematic. So, this successful body is also contrary to our particularly Western beauty standards. So, the beauty standards of womanhood are being violated at the same time as the standards of womanness defined as motherhood, which still is a dominant paradigm, right? The expectation that all women at least want to be mothers is still very strong in the Western paradigm, which is what is governing most of those who are going to be watching this, given that we are living in a Western centric society. So we have this paradox of pregnancy that for woman identified females, pregnancy is both the ideal and the, the dominant lack of ideal when it comes to bodies. So, what Dworkin and Walks do is analyze, in particular, this publication, Shape Fit Pregnancy, which is a magazine that's widely available. You may or may not be familiar with it if you have not been pregnant or you've not had a partner who's been pregnant. Probably not something you've paid close attention to. But they look at this particular magazine because it's targeted towards pregnant women. Um, and within this magazine, they look at the way it represents motherhood. And they notice several themes. These themes are things that should strike us as problematic. First and foremost, being that these representations of motherhood were predominantly, if not exclusively, white. So, motherhood, at least in its idealistic form, is presented very ethnocentrically. The second representation that they point out is that it is an upper class, or in best case scenario, upper middle class. And we see this through the ways in which motherhood is represented as something that, in order to have access to be a successful mother, you would need to have the kind of time and resources that one would only actually possess if you were middle class or upper middle class or upper class. Another important theme that comes out through this particular publication, but I think if we even looked more broadly, and that's what they want to argue, that we would see in broader publications, is this notion of self-disciplining, that the successful mother is the mother that is self-disciplined enough to manage being a mom or being a successful gestator, but also maintains self-control in that her body matches a particular aesthetic for the pregnant body, but also that she's maintaining a fitness level, that she is maintaining some sort of work-life balance. If we look at the holiday editions of these magazines, you'll see that she is still being the successful hostess, um, which should strike us as odd that she should be hosting parties and doing all these other things. And I would encourage you all, the next time you're at a grocery store or a bookstore, Barnes and Noble or something like that, and you happen to be in the magazine aisle, look for a magazine that targets pregnant women and just skim through the pages and see how many men do you see. These are also very exclusively woman identified female. So how many male bodies do you see? How many men do you see on the pages that are caring for the baby as opposed to caring for the female or the mother, or just period? How many persons of color do you see? How many of those persons are not, how many of the articles are not clearly geared towards someone who has an abundance of resources as opposed to assuming time management skills that don't require a lot of excessive resources? So they're analyzing these magazines and coming up with some of these broad themes. Now, let's turn specifically to the themes that regard bodies themselves, because in this module, we're talking about the ways in which bodies are regulated. And this is an important component of women's studies in general, because in women's studies, we really want to think about embodied perspectives, the way in which our physical beings really play an important component to our acquisition of knowledge and our experiences in the world. So there are three themes that they find throughout this particular magazine, but that also we can find more pervasive in publications geared towards women who are pregnant in the modern era. One is this idea of training for labor, the idea that in order to be a successful pregnant woman, that you should be engaging in fitness, and that this fitness should be targeted towards being a particular kind of fit that will enable you to be better at the labor process. And that if you're not fit, then you are actually doing a detriment to your fetus and a detriment to your baby. Second theme that reoccurs in this particular magazine is this idea of getting your body back. That the woman who doesn't very quickly get back into shape after pregnancy is somehow failing not just at her exercise regime, but is failing as a mother and is failing as a woman. So it's this idea that the failure is much broader. And then the third theme, and this is one that is in some ways perhaps the most disturbing, is this idea of integrating the third shift into the second shift. So let's take a moment here to talk about what we mean by the third shift, second shift notion. So the second shift is when women entered into the workforce, right? There was this notion of first shift being workforce, right? On the job, and the second shift being coming home after working in the labor force in the public sphere and having to then do all of the domestic labors that women traditionally did. So that's second shift, right? You work a first shift at your day job, right? And then you come home and do the cooking, the cleaning, the caring for your children, the everything else. That's a second shift. So whether you're male, female, man, woman identified, if you are doing those two jobs, they are two jobs, then that is a first shift and a second shift. Well, Dworkin and Walks are talking about this third shift, where in the by third shift, what they mean is this exercise regime. So this idea that you have to get your body back. And when they talk about integrating a third shift into the second shift, it's this idea that you have to somehow, that you should integrate this getting your body back, this fitness regime, into your second shift duties, your domestic duties. So we see this in the magazine in the form of doing squats while you do the laundry, using your newborn as a dumbbell to get your triceps back into shape. The baby kisses push-ups, those sorts of things in which you're integrating some sort of care activity or some sort of domestic labor, reproductive labor into your into this fitness labor as well. So these themes are ones that are particularly about having an external force dictating for mothers, in this case, prospective mothers, and we're talking here in particular about gestating mothers who are also intended mothers. So thinking back to our surrogacy talk, we're not discussing when those things don't line up. So where we have gestational mothers who are intended mothers, these are the ways that external forces try and govern what that motherhood should look like, and in particular, the way that should be embodied, the physical embodiment of motherhood. So where is the feminism in this? What Dworkin and Walks find particularly problematic here is that this fitness, this third shift, is presented to women as a feminist empowerment as opposed to an external negative. So fitness is presented as a form of self-actualization, that if you are a feminist, if you are a self-empowered woman who is self-actualizing, then you should take on this third shift. That fitness itself is evidence of control after childbirth, that you are taking control of your life, and so it's a symbol of your empowerment, and that it's an act of self-sufficiency, that it's demonstrating your own ability to exercise not just your body, but exercise your mind, your rationality, your self-control. So thinking back to when we talked about liberal feminism, this is the idea that you're demonstrating prudence with, and that Enlightenment idea of being able to demonstrate rationality, right? And thus your capacity for rationality, and you're deserving of rights, you're deserving of equality, through these acts of prudence. And so it's that your fitness, your self-sufficiency is demonstrating that you are powerful, that you're capable, that you're equal. And this, for Dworkin and Walks, is part of the reason we should see this as really pernicious. So we should see these magazines and this presentation of motherhood as problematic on a multitude of levels. We should see it as problematic for the ways in which motherhood is construed in this really limited way. That motherhood is white, upper class, or upper middle class. That it is exclusively female and woman-identified female. So it's very limited. It's non-intersectional. We should see it as problematic because it is regulating the body, so it's limiting the ways in which your physical manifestation can happen. And then thirdly, we should see it as problematic because it uses feminism to tell women the ways in which their bodies and their personhoods are wrong, and their presentations of motherhood are wrong. So, some takeaways here. What exactly does this contribute to our bigger, broader conversation of motherhood? Where does this take us in terms of the place of men in motherhood, the place of thinking about who is a mother and what is a mother? And I want us to keep thinking about why consider motherhood, and why open our discussion of regulation of the body and colonization of the body. And we haven't yet talked about what I mean by that, but we're going to get there. Why open up our conversations on colonization of the body with this notion of motherhood? All right, more lectures to come later.